these two boys were very close to Aaron Fisher. They have no anger towards him about the car accident, really, although you would think that they might. One of them is totally convinced that Aaron Fisher is lying about Jerry Sandusky. And this particular boy met Jerry with Aaron. I asked him on a scale of 1 to 10, how certain are you that he's lying about Jerry? He said, 10. And he said, by the way, lots of other people who know Aaron believe the same thing. The other boy answered the same question with a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. But he also said, there are a lot of other people who know Aaron who think that he's lying about this. Which I find fascinating when you consider the fact that, obviously the news media has presented a very, very different view of this entire case. And you would think that everyone would believe Aaron Fisher at this point. But those who know Aaron Fisher say, not true. And of course, there's the other element of this, that Aaron Fisher's former stepfather, the main male figure in his life before Jerry came along, was just arrested on 109 counts of child molestation of his own child. So to me, it's very plausible that maybe Aaron Fisher was abused, but that he's projecting his abuse by his stepfather, Eric Daniels, onto Jerry Sandusky. Now, this might be related to that, it might not be, but there's another interesting story about Aaron Fisher that's never been divulged publicly, and that is that Jerry Sandusky did not know how to make a video with his phone. He didn't know how to take pictures with his phone. And one day, during the grand jury, or I guess it was after the initial allegation by Aaron Fisher, Dottie wanted to take some video of the family singing some country music songs, and she took the video and she realized as she looked at the video that there was another video on Jerry's camera. So she wondered, okay, what's this all about? Well, it turned out to be a video made by Aaron Fisher on Jerry's phone that was a couple of years old. And from the setting, it was very clear that Aaron Fisher was in Jerry's car, and it was Jerry's phone, obviously, and it appeared to be outside of Jerry's football camp. And Aaron Fisher makes this video about 12 seconds long where he is pretending that he has been abducted and that he is being held hostage, and he starts crying, and then he points the camera and he says, "This is my attacker." He points the camera at some seemingly innocent bystander who's just standing next to the car, and then he turns off the camera. Now, at the very least, this is bizarre, and I'm just going to show you the video here. You're not going to be able to hear the audio, but I'll just give you a sense. This is the video that I just described of Aaron Fisher, just so you know that I'm not making something up here. So, if I can get this to work properly. There it is. Okay, so this is Aaron Fisher's video that he made on Jerry's phone. That's Aaron Fisher, and you'll see he starts to fake cry here in just a second. And then he'll turn the phone towards somebody else. There's the innocent bystander, just somebody not even paying attention, and he says, "That's my attacker." All right, so that's kind of weird, right? It first of all substantiates the notion that Aaron Fisher was a storyteller, and at times an extreme storyteller. But to me, I also look at that and I go, okay, he's shown that he's willing to take Jerry's phone and create a fake abduction video on it. If he was being abused, and he has to know Jerry has no idea how to use the phone, why didn't he say anything about his abuse at the hands of Jerry? Or at some point, why didn't he take the phone and document his abuse at the hands of Jerry? It supposedly happened dozens and dozens of times. It never occurred to him to document it in any way, shape, or form. And by the way, none of these kids, all of whom have cell phones, none of them documented any sort of abuse by Jerry. I mean, we're living in an age where almost everything is on video of some sort, video, audio, whatever. All these kids have cell phones. It just seems rather odd to me. There's an incredible lack of evidence where there ought to be evidence in this case. I mean, there's not one allegation of pornography. No pornography was found on Jerry's computer or phone, and I can assure you neither he nor Dottie have any idea on how to get rid of a video file that wouldn't be able to be found by forensics on a computer. There's not one allegation of alcohol applying. There's not one allegation of any attempt to pay off a victim to keep them quiet. There's not one allegation from the football camps, not one originated from the football camps, not one originated from the foster children, only one originated from the adopted kids. None of the other adopted kids believe Matt Sandusky, and I believe the record is clear that Matt Sandusky is lying. There's no DNA evidence. There's no evidence where there ought to be evidence. And that video, I think, of Aaron Fisher shows that here was a perfect opportunity for Aaron Fisher to provide some, and it didn't happen. So I find it rather odd that the three major reasons that the average person presumes that Jerry is guilty, other than the media, Firestorm, and Hurricane, are the Bob Costas interview, the Matt Sandusky flip, and the total number of victims. And I now believe that all three of those things are actually more consistent, especially the first two, with Jerry's innocence than with his guilt. I defy anybody to explain how a guy could get away with all this for 30 or 40 years and not be able to answer a very simple question from Bob Costas on the phone: are you sexually attracted to young boys? It's just not possible. And it blows apart this whole notion that Jerry could be this incredibly slick, manipulated puppeteer, actor, liar, when nothing else indicates that's the case. I mean, in his entire life, that no one believes that. No one has ever said, well, actually, now that I think about it, Jerry was a pathological liar and we could never trust him, or he was able to manipulate things. There's just no evidence of that. As far as Matt Sandusky, I've written extensively about why Matt Sandusky is not to be believed. The number one reason is he testified that nothing happened in the grand jury, and he said that other victims are lying. And then he also wanted to hold a press conference to say this, but he was dissuaded from doing so. He felt so strongly about it. But then, just before the trial, Jerry tells him stupidly that victim number two, the McQuarrie victim, has gone from a supporter to a potential victim, which is a really stupid thing to say in general, but especially if you've actually already abused Matt. And, if you've already abused Matt, why are you telling him that other people are flipping for money, giving him that idea? It's very obvious at that point that Matt starts to realize which way the wind is blowing. He wants to be on the winning side. He realizes his meal ticket is about to end. And so, he flips to the other side using repressed memory therapy, which no one believes. It's roundly mocked in legal and psychological circles. And by the way, Dottie told me just the other day that Matt went to one of the other adopted children and said, you have to back me up on this. You have to say that Jerry did something to you too. And that adopted son said, no, I'm not going to do that because it didn't happen. Matt is lying. He is a horrible person. He stole Jerry's national championship rings and he put them on eBay. His therapist told Dottie and Jerry that Matt had, quote, no conscience. He comes from a hideous, horrible family. His brother killed two people in cold blood. He begged Dottie and Jerry to adopt him at the age of 18, well after this alleged abuse occurred. There's just no way that Matt is telling the truth. It's just not plausible. There's just no way. I'm very positive of it. Now, as far as the number of victims are concerned, I get why people think, my God, how could all these people be lying? But it's really not nearly as many people as you think. This is why I focused on Aaron Fisher. Because if Aaron Fisher is in fact not telling the truth, the whole case really falls apart, because Aaron Fisher and Mike McQuarrie were the two bedrocks for how the prosecution was able to convince other people to go along with the case. At the time of Jerry's arrest, there were only two people who made accusations of a clearly sexual nature. I know that sounds mind-blowing, but it's absolutely true, because the McQuarrie victim, which I've detailed greatly, did not testify because he said nothing ever happened. The janitor victim never existed, and that episode probably never happened. The hellacious allegations of number 9 occurred after the arrest. He never came forward before the arrest or after the Sarah Cannon article, when everybody in State College knew that the prosecution basically put a Craigslist ad in the local paper looking for new victims. So the only two at the time of the arrest were Aaron Fisher, number 1, and number 4, who was the subject of that audio tape I told you about, where his own lawyer is trying to work with investigators to lie to him to get him to say he had sex because he wasn't saying that. So we're really talking about only Aaron Fisher at the time of the arrest. After the arrest, the whole world changes. And it's very obvious that victims are going to be protected and the Penn State's going to pay out, and that this is going to be very lucrative for lawyers and for victims. And so, to me, at that point, all bets are off. Katie barred the door, whatever cliche you want. And the fact that the best victims that the prosecution could come up with from this alleged flood that occurred after the arrest was number 9 and number 10, both of whom are extremely lacking in credibility. Extremely. Their stories make no sense. There's no evidence. Dottie and Jerry don't even know who number 10 is. He's a criminal. He claimed to have been abused in a silver convertible. There's no evidence of a silver convertible being any part of this case. Jerry and Dottie have any access to a silver convertible. It's just, that was the best the prosecution could come up with the post-arrest flood. That tells you an awful lot about these others that got settlements anonymously without testifying. I think it's very clear that this was a situation where there was a flood, which, by the way, a flood that wasn't as large as you might think it should be. I mean, Jerry Sandusky had interaction with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of at-risk boys over many, many years. And frankly, you would think there would be more, especially with the financial incentives involved. And interestingly, Frank Fina and Joe McGettigan, the prosecutors in the case, went on Showtime's 60 Minutes with Armin Katayan and essentially admitted that they didn't get everybody to come forward that they expected or hoped for, which told me that they have doubts about their own case, which I find fascinating. But before I get into that, though, I see this kind of like the Loch Ness Monster myth. Nobody ever saw the Loch Ness Monster until people started to claim that there was a Loch Ness Monster, and there was publicity surrounding the notion that there might be a Loch Ness Monster. Then every time people go to the loch, they're looking to see the monster. They want to believe that there's a monster. It's neat. And this is not even a situation where necessarily there's a financial incentive, although some people might with a hoax, with pictures or whatever. But the reality is, if no one said, and the media didn't say, and everyone didn't have this expectation that there was a Loch Ness monster, no one would ever see the shadows as a monster. They would just see the shadows as a shadow, or the ripples in the water as a ripple in the water. But it's the suggestion that I believe dictated everybody's testimony in this case, including Mike McQueary's. Mike McQueary, the most important or most underrated thing Mike McQueary said was in December of 2011, after the crap had hit the fan, he testified about when he had told people in the program at Penn State that Jerry shouldn't be around the locker room. And he was asked, was this before or after investigators came to you and asked you to come forward and told you that they were investigating Jerry Sandusky? And he said, almost certainly after, which of course means it was after. That's incredibly key, because the reality here is it was only the suggestion to Mike McQueary, and might have been a very strong suggestion based upon other things that I know and we've heard. The suggestion was what made Mike McQueary reinterpret what he thinks he had heard and seen, what he thought was 9 years earlier, when in fact it was 10 years earlier. Didn't even know the date, the month, and the year, because it wasn't that big of a deal. And contrary to what Frank Fina, the prosecutor in the Sandusky case, said, it did not shatter his universe to its core, because he didn't act like it shattered his universe to his core. And that's just the reality of it. I actually think Fina and McGettigan in that 60 Minutes Showtime interview with Armin Katayan, I sensed, again, much like the rest of this case, there was almost the opposite of the way everyone else perceived it. I think they're insecure about their case. Why in the world they would give that interview at that time, well after Jerry's convicted, no one's saying he's innocent? It almost felt like they were trying to convince themselves. And the fact that they would hang their hat on Dottie not being able to answer, or not willing to answer the question, why are all these boys saying this about your husband? When in fact what Dottie wanted to say was, they're doing this for money, but she knew she would get destroyed if she said that. She knew that, these were kids that she thought of as her own sons, many of them. She still couldn't wrap her brain around it. And frankly, the defense still thought it wasn't necessary to destroy the victims. They were so naive, they thought they were going to be okay because they thought they were innocent. Again, no consciousness of guilt. If you're the guilty person, think about this, folks. If Jerry Sandusky is totally guilty, aren't you destroying Aaron Fisher during the grand jury presentment? Aren't you leaking information about Aaron Fisher? Aren't you immediately doing everything you can to destroy the credibility of the victims? And they never did anything like that because Jerry naively thought, almost to the day of the trial starting, that if he just talked to these kids, it was all going to be okay. He told Joe Amendola that. And Joe said, Jerry, we're so far beyond that. It's unbelievable. You know, Joe made it very clear. Jerry was just so naive about what was really happening, which is totally consistent with no consciousness of guilt. Jerry thought he could just talk to these kids and this would go away. There was no thought to destroy them because they didn't think they were guilty. You go on a search and destroy mission immediately if you know you're guilty because you know that's the only path you have. But they still cared about these kids. Now, I want to make sure that people understand I am not alleging a conspiracy. There was no conspiracy here, folks. I don't believe the Second Mile knew that Jerry Sandusky was a pedophile. I don't believe the Office of the Attorney General did anything wrong during that 2-year lull in the grand jury investigation because they had a witness that no one believed was good enough to go to war with. So they were just kind of keeping it alive, and then Mike McQueary came along, and everyone saw stars. Everyone started to believe in the case. All of a sudden, you know, victim 6's mom probably helps out with some more victims. And now all of a sudden, it's turbocharged because everyone now sees it in their self-interest. This is a career maker. Not to mention, I doubt that Governor Corbett would have been too upset to see Penn State involved in this particular case, specifically something that might make Graham Spanier look bad. And then, you know, once the crap hit the fan, one of the reasons why I'm positive there's no conspiracy here, folks, is that nobody could have predicted exactly how things would have gone once the crap hit the fan. Because this almost was a non-national story. I maintain that if the NBA strike that week, which ended on the night Joe Paterno was fired, had ended on that Sunday or that Monday, and if Tim Tebow, who was ESPN's god at that point, had gotten injured on that Sunday or done something crazy, they ignore this story. There was a very good chance that none of the turbocharging of this story on a national level would have occurred. And so that would have changed all of the incentives, that would have changed the entire dynamic, and therefore no conspiracy could have possibly anticipated exactly how this all would have turned out. If Joe Paterno had done an interview like he should have, it could have changed everything. So it's absurd. It's absurd. No, not only are there no incentives for a conspiracy, but no one could have anticipated exactly how this all turned out. And it just really bothers me that people think that this is all a big conspiracy. No, there's no conspiracy here, and I'm not alleging one towards Jerry. I'm alleging everybody bought into a myth, and then once that snowball goes down the mountain, nobody wanted to get in front of the snowball. Everybody has an incentive for that snowball to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Everybody's making money. Everybody's having their careers made. Nobody wants to stand in front of it because you're going to get run over. And and even though many people agree with me, nobody wants to say so publicly because it's just not worth it. Jerry's in jail probably the rest of his life. He can't help anybody. And no one cares about the truth enough. No one cares about due process. No one cares that this trial was an embarrassment to our judicial system. No one cares that Penn State got destroyed over something that might not have been anything. And I realize this sounds insane. I realize how in the world could this possibly be occurring and only one guy on a crude YouTube video be able to figure it out. First of all, I'm not the only one that figured it out. I'm the only one willing to say it publicly because I guess I'm just stupid enough to care about the truth still. But this is the truth, or at the very least, this is a truth that makes a hell of a lot more sense than the story we were told. Because the story we were told presumes that a generation of boys who have been told and taught time and time again, if a coach raises his voice to you, you go tell your parents immediately and get that coach in trouble. I've coached many sports. That's what everybody in this generation has been taught. Yet this generation of boys decided it was okay to engage in sex acts with an old man and not tell anybody? Not one person told anybody contemporaneously. No one. And why? We're told The reason is because they didn't want to lose their Penn State football tickets. At a time period, by the way, when Penn State wasn't even that good during parts of this particular story. It's just absurd. It's laughable that people bought into this, including myself. It makes no damn sense. I wish there was one allegation that made any sense at all and where the evidence didn't contradict it. And so, do I know exactly what happened between Jerry and these boys? No. No one is ever going to know because the trial was a sham. But to me, the totality of the evidence makes far more sense under the scenario that Jerry Sandusky is a guy who, just as he told me, had boundary issues, may have tested boundaries, that Penn State didn't cover anything up because, as Jerry said, there was nothing to cover up, or as he said at one point, there was very little to hide. The reality is that this is a myth. This is the big lie theory in its ultimate extrapolation. This is, the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. And I understand that no one's going to believe me. I get it. But my dedication in this story was to the truth. And I currently believe that this is the truth. And a lot of other people agree with me. And if you think it's the truth, all I ask is that you let other people in your sphere know this. Because at the very least, people ought to be able to be comfortable at some point expressing doubt about this. This is the only case I've ever heard of where you're not even allowed to talk about the other side. You can claim that aliens killed JFK. You can claim that O.J. Simpson is innocent. You can claim that 9/11 was an inside job. And by the way, you can do commercial endeavors successfully and be taken seriously by the news media if you say all those things. Yet, if you suggest that Jerry Sandusky is not as guilty or not nearly as guilty as he was portrayed to be or what the convictions indicated, you're automatically a crazy person. Well, if that's what I'm perceived as, so be it, because I'm actually very confident I'm right and the facts back me up. And all I ask is that you consider this with an open mind, and then if you agree with it, you tell somebody else you know, because that's the only possible way the truth in this case is ever going to survive. And to me, as I keep saying, the truth has got to matter. The truth has got to still matter. And I'm very confident that what I just told you today is far closer to the truth than anything else you've heard in this entire case. Thank you for watching, and please share this video.